Okay, why don't we? Oh, I see. There's, right? Yeah.
Maybe maybe 20. It's 5 for the beer. You're already on the list, right? That's one?
Yeah, you're on the list.
Already.
Oh, sorry. So, yeah, do you have here? Well, we'll give you about 20. Some beer. Give Jody beer. Here's all the volunteers, so I can do that. All right?
I bought the tickets. Yeah. Thomas Smith.
Well, super animals. Yeah. You good?
Okay.
No, I don't get it. I don't get
We're trying to get rid of stuff.
We just hide where today. We're just circling back to my home.
How did you guys do that?
No, nice to meet you.
Yes, and Mr. Swing.
Yes, just in the
No excuse to forget how old you are, right?
I know, it's so nice.
Well, it makes it so easy on the parents.
And my grandparents. It's such a dream.
No, although as I used to like to remind my golden dragon. So just like you gotta develop your skills to become a person that's stuck here too.
It's true, yeah. I hear your golden dragon is on to film set.
Well, I hope it's gonna confirm.
Yeah, but he's pretty good. I just finished the first one in English. So I'm not like doing everything I do, but they will be writing or paddling or hoping to do some cool art stuff.
Let's start about 5 minutes, guys. Awesome.
Oh my God.
Ridge. Did you? Oh yeah, I've been to your place. Yeah. The one that. Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's a soda. There's also another
Very fun. You need to take the needle off. Yeah, you gotta just stop the train.
Is there a thing in between? No.
On the left there.
Oh, it's a binary. I like to lift the lever. Not like
I mean, you could too. Like, Brian, you good? Yeah, we good to go? Yeah, I think so. Does anybody have a raffle ticket? Did you get a raffle ticket?
Are we doing a 50-50?
We're doing better than 50-50.
We didn't get a raffle ticket.
Great.
I didn't get one.
Okay.
Ben said we might be hungover today, and I went like this. It's all good. Oh, I heard you say we might be hungover today, and then I went like this.
Yeah, no, I don't have the other one.
Yeah, I worked out right before this. What?
We got 2 for 1 on the coats.
No, I must have put it in there.
Oh yeah, here we go.
We'll wait till our latest guest gets seated and I'll start. You okay back there? Great, thank you. Welcome folks. Everybody okay, like temperature-wise? Anybody too hot, too cool? I've got air conditioning, so I don't have that on yet. I just have to do this. I do, because we're live streaming. That's better, right, Brian? Yep. Right on. Handheld. Going handheld. It's great. Welcome to West End Phoenix, 3 Bartlett. For whom is this their first time in the space? Well, welcome. It's great to have you here. We've been here for about a year. And we love to have people in it doing cool stuff. So we're excited to have our guests. We're excited to have you here. This is the first, this was originally going to be a 3-day event, but it's now 2 days. We have 2 events tomorrow. We have Gabby Lim and Vass Bednar at 11 a.m. And at 2 p.m. we have Craig Silverman and Chloe Brown in conversation. And there are some tickets available too if you'd like to come. You can show up, $10 at the door, or go to westernphoenix.com and click and get your ticket to that. We decided to do this kind of event largely because we were inspired to do it by fellow journalists in the United Kingdom who are interested, I think, in West End Phoenix as kind of as community activators. I kind of hate that sort of, de rigueur kind of language. Really, it's just people being together in their neighborhoods, and that's what we do here. So we're excited to have people talk about the issues that these folks are going to speak of tonight. But first, we're going to have a raffle. Okay, keeping it real at 3 Bartlett. And so I'm going to first give away this beautiful book of poetry by the amazing Phoebe Wang, who I think wrote about herons for us in the water issue of the West End Phoenix, which is in her first year, and has contributed other poems. And this is a beautiful book that came out on Cullen and Stewart last year. So the lucky recipient of this beautiful Phoebe Wang book called Admission Requirements is holding the ticket number. Yep. The 8321008. You got it? Amazing. I bet you didn't think you'd be walking away with poetry tonight. But that's a beautiful book. Brian, you getting me loud and clear back there? Amazing. I should say this is our first ever international live stream for an event at the West End Phoenix. That's pretty exciting, right? Cool. Excellent. Good. All right. Oh, I also have this beautiful. Now it's a large, so if it doesn't fit you and you want to trade it or give it to a friend, you can. This was donated by our friends at Rotate This, is a beautiful rotate this T-shirt. Value, what's that? $30? 40. Let's call it 40. And the winner of that T-shirt is holding ticket number 8321011. Wicked. Taking it back to Grand Prairie. I love it. Amazing. Well, Mac, you're not in. The fix would be in if you won something. We can't do that. And Mac, just to your left, can you hand me that? Yeah. This is a beautiful bag, courtesy of our friends at Six Shooter Records out on Carlaw. And inside that bag are 3 albums by Elliot Brood, July Talk, and Nisa, which is a new record. And I'd like to give that away to somebody tonight. So, the winner of that, and if you don't have a turntable, again, you can give it away to one of your friends who has a turntable. And the winner of that is holding ticket number 8321015. Nice. Erica, come on down. You have a turntable? Fantastic. Thank you. Erica is also a delivery volunteer of the West End Phoenix folks. Let's hear it for all our delivery volunteers. Amazing. Okay, great. I'm going to introduce our 2 guests. I realize that I think the collective legacies of these 2 people will become apparent in terms of the subject that they're going to address and the context in which they're going to address it, which is largely based out of the reporting that came out of Vice while these 2 gentlemen worked there. I had this idea that I would kind of frame them together, imagining a world in which PEI was playing Edmonton for the Stanley Cup final, but sadly that is mere fantasy. Josh Visser is from Prince Edward Island, former editor at Vice magazine, my fellow hockey teammate. This is Josh on to the right of the table, and. Reporter Mack Lamoureux, who has done incredible work in the space that we're about to discuss tonight. In from Victoria, but originally from Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta. Welcome, Mac, to West End Phoenix. And I think what's
applause for Fort Saskatchewan in there.
yeah, it's good. And I think what's going to happen tonight is guys are going to talk a little bit, and then we're going to take some questions, and then talk a little bit, and we're going to take some questions. And keep your questions brief, please, if possible. And we don't need to hear stories. We just need to hear the question, and then then our experts will address it, if that's okay. Sounds good with everybody? Okay. Josh Visser and Mack Lamoureux, everyone. And you can go handheld on this if you want to.
How you doing, buddy?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Eat the mic.
I only use these at karaoke. Okay, is this all right? This fine? I assume it's fine. Yes. So, Josh Visser. I was the former editor-in-chief of Vice News. I've been there for like 10 years before the company decided to go kaput.
Yeah, self-immolated.
And I hired Mac at one point, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I'm Mack Lamoureux. For 8 years or so, I was a senior reporter at Vice News. I was on the extremism desk for the vast majority of that. Over the years, I reported on groups like the Soldiers of Odin, 3% Canada. With Ben McCoo, who's here now, we broke a lot of really great stories on neo-Nazi groups like The Base and Atomwaffen. I covered QAnon groups like Roman and Didalo, and then at the end, I wrote about this thing called 764, which is a sextortion group that I'm not going to go into because it is the worst thing in the fucking world. But yeah.
FDG, do we have to be here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I immediately am just testing it.
Yeah, and just a quick note on that, we're going to be talking largely about our expertise, which is in extremism, which includes a lot of fairly gnarly stuff. So just a little bit of warning. We're not going to we'll try to keep it as PG as we can, but there'll be potentially some stuff if we get into it that's not overly pleasant. So just a little minor warning. But yeah, so maybe we'll start with where Mac and I started.
Yeah,
extremism.
and the way that we were looking at doing this is, if you can see from how we're dressed, this isn't the most formal event in the world. So if you have a pressing question, just put up your hand. We don't really mind if you interrupt. And then as long as it's, within what we're talking about, don't just kind of try and hijack the event. But if you guys have a question about what we're talking about, please do. Like, we're happy to hear from you.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff might get a little bit in the weeds, so if we mention a group
Yeah.
or something that you've never heard of, just please, we'll explain it as best we can.
Yeah, and if I talk
Cool.
about Adam Waffen for like 9 minutes, just nudge me and I'll move on.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll start with Mack's little tale of how he got started.
Yeah.
As a freelancer with Vice, which was I think your first story to do with extremism, right?
It wasn't necessarily my first story. It was my first big one with you. It would have been around 2014 or 2015. I was a freelancer in Edmonton. I was kind of working with CBC Edmonton, and I was writing like little blogs for Josh. Justin Trudeau had just gotten elected, and I knew that when Barack Obama was elected in the United States, there was a massive jump in militia groups. We saw 3%ers, and we saw all these groups, the Michigan militia, jump back. So I figured, okay, well, if we have a left-leaning government kind of coming into Canada, maybe we'll see something similar. So I started following groups, and the one that I saw jump up was called the Soldiers of Odin. And with the Soldiers of Odin, they are a anti-Muslim street, what would you call them, like an anti-Muslim street patrolling gang? Yeah, they were founded by a man named Mika Ranta. He was a Finnish neo-Nazi. While they weren't as overt about their kind of white supremacist roots, they were very, very, very anti-Muslim, and they were very, very deep in conspiratorial rhetoric about that religion and that community. And so I had never really written about this before, so it was kind of trial by fire. I had tried to get in and interview them, and they obviously refused to speak to me. I was a journalist. So what I did was I stole a name from a guy I worked with. This is probably bad form. I stole a fake name from a guy I worked with at a liquid propane gas plant in Alberta. The name was Mark Machansky. I'm really sorry, Mark. And I created a fake Facebook account that was overtly racist. It had Screwdriver, the white nationalist group, as a Facebook header. And so me posing as myself, pretty run-of-the-mill journalist, they wouldn't let me anywhere near them, making an overtly racist Facebook page under the name of my friend. They invited me to join within minutes. And so I went undercover and I joined them, and I went to a few of their meetings, and I saw how they were going, and then I got pretty much all their internal documents. And I ended up at a Ramada Inn. And I was there when they were trying to vet everybody. And I looked very young at the time, and they asked me for my ID. My ID does not say Mark Machansky on it. And so I was with a friend who will go nameless there, and we weren't necessarily worried about what they would do to us. Like, worst comes to worst, they would just kind of kick the shit out of us. But there was another recruit there who was, for lack of better word, tweaking, and we knew he had a knife on him. So we weren't necessarily worried about what the group would do, but we were worried what this man might do to impress the people he was trying to join. And so all of these guys smoked, and I said, hey guys, let's go for a cigarette. And they're like, yeah. And then me and my friend left through the kitchen. And we published the article 2 days later, and they truly hated me. And now Josh is going to talk about the safety concerns of that and why we would never do that again. Because that's really bad. Don't do that.
This is an example of exactly what you don't do as an
Yeah.
editor or a reporter. As Ben here in the second row, I'm going to pick on all night, well knows.
Ben was working on a similar story, and I completely kneecapped him.
Yeah, so we had been in Ukraine when the hostilities started there, whenever that was, and he can tell you that things have changed quite a bit on the security front, given we spent 5 hours every day with our security team making sure that everyone had all the proper safety equipment and safety plans and backup plans, and we certainly wouldn't be sending young reporters into the lion's den.
Yeah, and so that was kind of my entry into reporting on extremism. It wasn't necessarily something that I wanted to report on. It wasn't what I set out to do. But there was very few reporters in the country that were doing that. There was Ben, there was Stuart Bell, and not too many else. So from that time, people were just kind of giving me scoops and giving me kind of information, and I just kept reporting on it more and more. to the point where I kind of became one of the point people for this topic. I never really necessarily sought out to be that, but in the end, it kind of happened. I don't think I would ever, other than my years kind of reporting on it, disclaim that I'm some sort of extremism expert. I definitely have like a pretty good layman's, understanding, but that's how I got into it, running away from a gang of anti-Muslim people in the kitchen of a Ramadan Inn in North Edmonton. And now 8 years later, we're sitting here.
Yeah. So like in this period too, it was 2015. I mean, something happened in 2016 that really kind of expedited conspiracy theories and disinfo and extremism in general, where we kind of moved from covering militias mostly to covering both, a giant conspiracy ring and more overt neo-Nazi groups. So we're going to slightly pivot into that on QAnon, which I assume most people are familiar with. I think, honestly, Mack was the person who introduced me to the term in the first place. I think one of the interesting things is, I'm sorry, I'm going to like reference like 3,000 word articles that are like 6 years old here. But if you ever get a chance to read it, like Mack had really focused on, not in like, really kind of on the human aspect of QAnon in terms of like the real damage it has done to families, communities. There is people that are like completely lost in it, like they're estranged from their families, like marriages are breaking up, people can't talk to their parents anymore because this is all they go on about. And I think like when we were getting into this world, like we really noticed like the residual damage that people were causing. Like, yes, obviously storming the Capitol is where this all led and very obvious, but there's a lot of really like damaged homes and families that I think are a little bit underreported, and I think Mack did a lot of reporting in that space, which I personally found really great to read. Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I must have been a weird employee because I would like show up really happily with just the worst story, like a dog with a dead bird. I'd be like, "Look what I found! It's horrible." Someone's calling me. We're not going to pick that up. It's something I like to really focus on when I speak about QAnon, and in particular one story that I've spent maybe 4 years reporting on now, which is Romana Diderot, the QAnon Queen of Canada. Who we will probably get into in a little bit.
Yeah, maybe just actually.
Sure, yeah. So Romana Diderot is a cult leader who preaches a lot of things. It essentially started in pretty base level QAnon stuff, and now it's grown into the truly esoteric. But essentially, long story short, she's convinced a bunch of people she's the true Queen of Canada, and they spent 2 years traveling the country, going place to place and having little parties where people would come out and in like a Walmart parking lot. A lot of Walmart parking lots where they would come out and they would give her, money and all this sort of adulation. And yeah, that's a really funny thing when you say it like that. But when you break it down, these are people that are suffering, and I feel a lot of the time some of the surface level coverage of QAnon and the groups can be really shitty, and it can be really just making fun of them and punching down. These are people... Oh, are we all good? Okay, cool. These are people that are suffering, some of them greatly, as Josh kind of indicated. These are people who have lost touch with their families. Some people have lost their homes. These are people that have completely alienated themselves from any sort of structure they had to protect themselves. So on the macro level, it can be really funny, but on the micro level, it's absolutely tragic. And I feel we should help these people. What they believe is obviously insane and really out of this world and really hard to rationalize. But they're people and they're suffering, and I feel there's a lot of punching down. Is that a question back there?
It is a question.
Oh, hey.
So these people are finding their community online.
Yeah.
And the online world is legitimizing, it's feeding and legitimizing their beliefs in a way that, like, well, what did that in the past? I guess just contact often other people would have done that in the past. But is there some way to, you want to help these people, is there some way to cut off this, like, this source of this online source that's feeding their problems? Like, what do we do?
Oh God.
Can you respond by addressing her question a little
Yeah.
bit?
So the question was essentially, what do we do? We have this situation where there's a lot of people that have created these communities online and have completely alienated themselves, and it's an incredibly hard thing to pull them away. And how do we address it? More or less, that's the question, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think because just thinking about, I'm thinking to what we were supposed to talk about yesterday, which is the Online Harms Act.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to think, like, without curtailing people's ability to express themselves and to, like this just seems like a pretty dangerous place for a lot of people and for a greater society. And I have no idea if there's a way to address it.
Well, there are some studies out there that indicate, like, actions you can take. If I knew how to fix this, I would make so much more money than I do. But the big thing I would say is just you don't want to cut these people out of your life. You got to remember their humanity. I was speaking with another reporter named Justin Ling not too long ago about a very interesting model he was talking about called, it was tackling misinformation through jiu-jitsu, which if you know me, I really like that because I really like jiu-jitsu. But it's by leaning into kind of allowing their pressure to counter it. So you would agree with them at first, and then you would try and pull them back with little kind of movements. You would be like, yeah, like in many ways since Justin Trudeau did take over, life has gotten harder, whether it be through COVID or whether it be by any means of his own. But you know what, maybe necessarily it's not, a cabal of sex traffickers who are doing this. Maybe like it's corporatism, and then you can kind of work your way through that. I don't know if I'm the best person to actually speak on that. There's a lot of practitioners who have done a lot of research. So I would just recommend that you go out there. There's lots of research on it, and I really don't want to get it wrong, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll give a little bit of my civilian opinion here. I think like one of the main things is kind of like the loss of media literacy is kind of something that happens in this space. Like once people are inside these groups and inside their echo chamber, it is very difficult to get them out. And like it often requires actual like de-radicalization programs, which is something was on my docket this year. We had a big story plan that we were working with a group in the US to kind of like look at how they're getting usually young men out of extremist programs. But yeah, I mean, like it's really like expecting tech or the government to do something in this space is pretty unlikely to happen. Like I think a lot of it is, catching warning signs with people when it's your mom's giving you like a number of like fake articles, which may or may not have happened to anyone in this group, including myself. Like it's saying like, hey, where are you getting your information from? Like, let's roll this back a little bit.
We were actually speaking of this last night, that the platforms do have something to do by protecting their users, that I don't feel that they're necessarily fully doing. I feel that they have a pretty robust thing in words, but if you're seeing the research, including some stuff that's coming out of the Institute of Strategic Dialogue, which is a think tank that I'm at now, they're not necessarily following their own, what would you call it? Their own guidelines. They're not following their own things that they put out there. So I feel the platforms are a little bit of the place that you can lean on to try and fix this. I don't know if you necessarily want to go through the government because, I'm a bit of a free speech dork, but also I understand that the harms that can come from it.
Hey.
JR.
Hey, JR.
You mentioned young men mostly. And I wonder, is it the majority being radicalized young? And do you think that some sort of like age gate that was actually effective rather than just saying, yes, I'm 18, would counter that or stem the flow a little bit if it was only sort of older people who could have access to the space?
I don't know. You're dealing with like digital natives, like people that grew up with the internet. They're gonna get around this. Like you can try and put this stuff on them, but like, it's not gonna necessarily stop it. Like it's good in the ways of. It kind of reminds me. So I was at the convoy. At the very end, I went there at 3 a.m. And I remember they all knew the next day the police were going to come and break it all up. And they were building a snow barrier to try and keep them out. And I talked to them for a little bit. And I was like, what are you doing, man? Like, that's pretty interesting. And he was like, we got to do something. Even though we know that they're going to blow right through it, at least it's something. So maybe doing that, it's a snow barrier, but it's a barrier. You know?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the age thing too, I mean, it kind of depends on the group. Like certainly the extremist groups, your Proud Boys and Boogaloo Boys and stuff like that, tend to skew much younger, very, very male. But like on the like QAnon side, like if you looked at like all those faces at storming the Capitol, there's a lot of middle-aged people there. So I mean,
well, in Romana Dietlo's followers
yeah,
skew old women, like senior women. Yeah.
I think about smoking and that being something that we manage to sort of like make gross.
Yeah.
That young people are very into with it. And if there's some sort of equivalent approach we could apply to social media to say like this is stuff that's hurting your brain the way cigarettes hurt your bones.
Could you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah, so he was asking if there is a way that we could kind of put in age gates that would help curtail it. And he used the analogy of smoking, of ripping darts. But yeah, you know what? I'm going to go to Josh for this because I kind of had I gave a big analogy, Josh. This is your turn.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly not 100% sure the answer is there. Like, I think education is the big one. I think Dave and I were in here a couple weeks ago talking about how like Ontario used to have media literacy classes in high school. I didn't go to high school in Ontario, so I can't confirm that, but I believe Dave. Yep. The idea of having that now, I feel, would be extremely political, very difficult to do. I suspect.
You would also need platform uptake because a lot of the places that we're seeing this is like Telegram, which is run out of Russia, and they're not going to be listening to westernized sources that are saying, "Why don't you do this?" They don't need to listen to us; they make their money elsewhere. And we are seeing like extremely young people. Like when we were reporting on the base, when Ben and I did a story. Where they actually started essentially a youth program because they had people as young as 13, 14 trying to join this neo-Nazi group. And that they essentially had to corner them and be like, or to put them off in the corner and say, wait until you're 16 and then you can come kill people for the white race. So yeah, age is a big problem. I don't necessarily know where I'm going there with this, but it's bad. It's bad out there, folks.
Yeah, and like certainly on like the angry young men thing, like that has existed since the beginning of time. Young men have felt disenfranchised and feel the need to join groups that have really bad goals. But like it's something we've talked about, we've reported on with a number of people. It's just like, how can we make these young men a little bit less angry? Because at the end of the day, a lot of it is like these people are finding community. It's terrible community for sure, but it is a community for them. In some cases, like a lot of these militia groups will like build in like public service, like they'll like patrol the streets and stuff like that. Like so they have this idea of like, oh, I'm doing something good here, and I think there is something to people wanting value and obviously going to the wrong place for that.
And it's and when we're speaking about like QAnon and stuff, it's no coincidence that it really exploded during COVID when people were at home, they were isolated, and they were on their computer. A lot of people became extremely depressed, and they what? Rightfully so. It was bad. I went full squirrely. I painted my entire apartment over Christmas just because. So these people found community online. And where a lot of them found it online was extremely negative to their lives. And actually, at the same time, we've found research shows that during times of strife, conspiratorial thinking explodes. So we had this kind of double-edged sword where people were more leaning towards conspiratorial rhetoric, and they were locked in their house and online in ways that we hadn't seen before. So I don't think it's any coincidence that we saw these groups grow during this time. Hopefully now that we're a little removed from it, we're going to see a little bit of downtake as people return to their regular scheduled programming. I like to give people a long rope. Being from central Alberta, I have a lot of people in my life I truly love that have believed stuff I do not believe, we shall say. And I'm just kind of let them, and they're slowly kind of coming back. I don't know if time is the thing that solves this, but I think it's helping.
A little bit, and then, I mean, you do have the most influential politician in the world, who unfortunately is Trump, going full into this,
that's true.
which doesn't make it any easier, and obviously is getting a lot of support for it.
Yeah.
Has his own echo chamber that is now pulled in, what would have been mainstream Republicans.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about last night about, what was that study you mentioned about?
I
my
mentioned
goodness.
so many studies.
The one about mainstream Republicans and how they've crossed the conspiratorial.
Oh yeah, well it has to do with I remember, back in 2016, I did a story where I spoke to somebody about I guess the traditional path of a conspiracy theorist, and he had something he called the point of no return, and that is when you start thinking the media and the government are making up information to sway you and to kind of corrupt your thought process, more or less. And we were joking that for a lot of people in the American right, that is kind of a starting point of believing that the government and mainstream media, such as say CNN or the New York Times, are all but happy to create this kind of false reality. And it's just not great that that's the starting point now, is what one man 8 years ago described to me as the point of no return. Yay. Hey, Sarah.
What you're describing with the point of no return sounds to me a lot like a psychotic break, like a break in reality.
I don't know if I'd say that.
Well, I don't know. I wonder. This might be stating the obvious, but I kind of wonder if the rise in extremism has to do a little bit with loneliness epidemic, and Trudeau's emphasis on mental health, which is non-existent in Canadian healthcare.
Again, it's no coincidence that it's coming during a time where there's inflation, job prospects are limited, the housing bubble is an absolute nightmare. I don't feel there's a coincidence at all. Call it late stage capitalism, call it mismanagement of the government. All of that sort of greater narrative is definitely playing into it. I think you're 100% into it.
Conspiratorial thinking, that's a paranoia. These are, and
In some ways.
distortions are very common in mental health. People that struggle with mental health.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a part of it. I wouldn't want to just say all of QAnon is a mental health issue. I mean, maybe it's in the DMM-6 or whatever. They'll get there at some point. But I mean, a lot of it is very mainstream Americans who are dealing, and Canadians obviously, and everyone else that are dealing with the same issues that everybody is. And I think loneliness is a big one. We certainly see that. It's these people are finding communities online, and when you think about it, a lot of these people look at it as a big game when they're doing QAnon. They're all trying to find a puzzle and seeing shaded messages from Trump and Biden and stuff like that. And I get that could be quite exciting or interesting, and it gives you a little bit of purpose every day that hey, I'm gonna drop some truth bombs in my Telegram group and get a bunch of likes, and that makes somebody feel good.
There's a
It was so much compassion. It's not a bad thing.
as reporters, we're trained and we work very hard not to diagnose mental health on anybody. And I feel we're just inherently being well, maybe, I don't know. Right?
Yeah, I'd like to think we're trying to be empathize with these people as much as we can. Clearly, there's a lot of people that empathizing is extremely difficult, and Mac and I have gotten a lot of people and been like in trouble. We've gotten people arrested and sent to jail like for the stuff
we've
that
ruined lives.
Well, they were ruining lives first.
Well, they ruined lives, yeah.
So,
but it's like,
but yeah, like it's certainly an aspect. I think we're both maybe a little uncomfortable speaking in the mental health space. It's not something we've done a lot of, but I think I would assume there's some like really interesting research that I have not read yet in that space.
Graham?
Yeah, I just want to go back to that first story with you for a second, Matt. Can you talk about like the compulsion to be able to go and look after those people and like try to discover what that story is? Like, where did the impetus for that come from for you?
You talking about the Soldiers of Odin?
I am, yeah.
What, like why I wanted to go cover it?
Why? It's a very regular thing. Like, I understand the bigger impulse,
Yeah.
but like following through with that extreme of a measure to go and get a story, like, why was that a thing for you?
You used to repeat it.
Yeah. So the question was, why did I go and do something incredibly stupid to report on the Soldiers of Odin? I was young and stupid. I was like 24. I was fresh out of journalism school, and I was very, very hungry to make it. I knew how horrifyingly difficult it is to make it in the journalism industry. And I think I was going to pretty far extremes to get stories. At that point, I was doing a lot of, I guess you could call it gonzo journalism. I remember at one point in Edmonton, we have a guy that just does push-ups for money on the street. We got a nod. You know the push-up guy. Yeah, we got a push-up guy head in the house. And so I wanted to find him and report on him, so I printed out a picture with his face on it, and I said, Doug Pruden called me, and I put my cell number on it. And then I postered White Avenue with it. So I was just doing whatever I could for stories at that time. Again, I didn't necessarily want to be an extremism reporter. I knew it was a good story, and I wanted that story, so I was going to pretty far lengths to get it. I wouldn't do it now, and I wouldn't recommend doing it.
Yeah,
but
young reporters are kind of like a rocket, and like an editor's job is to try to like take that energy and try to point it in the right direction so it doesn't explode on both of you. Like certainly like the most difficult and also exciting part of like being an editor is like when you have that hungry young reporter that has like the wild story, because like frankly it's usually people that are like really driven to make it that are going to find that thing, and not necessarily the person that's been sitting there for 20 years doing their beat. But it's often like especially like what we were started at Vice. It was certainly we're trying to make a name for ourselves as a media organization. We're like specifically trying to be in that space. Vice was the media organization that went to North Korea, that like embedded with ISIS, stuff like that. So there certainly was a lot of people that were very excited to do that, occasionally on drugs, which we had to be like, stop doing that.
I never did any of my reporting on drugs. I would like the record to say.
Nobody wants to read this dribble.
I reported once from Shoeless Joe's. It's as close as I ever came to reporting on drugs.
JR and Dave are...
So you mentioned Trump and you mentioned jail, and it strikes me that a lot of these extremist groups are enabled by politicians who are populist in nature and whatnot. We have one of our own here. How much do you think political accountability, if that's possible anymore, would help with this issue of extremism?
Josh.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's just funny because the line has shifted so much, even in my career. Like, I started journalism like 17, 18 years ago, and cabinet ministers would resign over an expensive orange juice. And now I think, like, Trump has the quote, and which I actually think is true, of, like, I could kill somebody on Fifth Avenue and no one would care. And, like, we're in that space. Not only, like, the guy got convicted and the entire party like just decide to throw rule of law out the window and say, oh, we don't believe in this court's judgment. So like, and I think like you've seen that in the UK, you see that in Canada a little bit. I think people realize that there is, hay to be made by appealing to the, most base interests, and there's not a lot of accountability. Like people just don't resign the way there's like the lack of shame. I'm just kind of speaking for myself here and on my thoughts, but yeah, like people just don't have shame anymore the way they used to. And like these extremist groups have taken advantage of that. And like, I think, you would think that someone like Trump calling out the Proud Boys in a debate in front of 100 million people would be a bad thing. But it worked out for both of them, really, to a certain extent. He gets extremist groups that are going to provide that kind of like shitty noise on the internet for him, and he just has gets the left-wing media to give a go at him, which he doesn't care about. So.
And now for a lot of those kind of like mid-level, mid-tier extremist groups, you have entire media organizations and an ecosystem that are built to kind of feed this narrative. And so I think there is a lot of emboldening going around, and I think that could start with politicians, but I think it expands far outward.
Going back to the media literacy thing, a couple of hippies, good kind, had media literacy become part of the Ontario public school curriculum in the 70s, and Mike Harris killed it. But it was about the things that you talk about. And digital literacy would be a thing that would be much needed among younger kids. My question is really about your relationship a little bit between the two of you. I mean, I know Matt through you, Josh, but you've worked really closely together on some really vital and electric assignments. Of all of those collective works, which one gave you the most consternation? Is there one in particular that you battled? Was there an instance in which you had to say no to Josh? Sort of walking the line that you do.
Let's hear this.
How do you resolve that? Where's the?
I'm sure I said no once or twice. I'm not big on no. I usually am try to get to yes. But yeah, I think one of the, particularly in the extremism space, one of the biggest conversations we have is about are we shining a light in something or are we amplifying something? And we have a lot of conversations about that. We tend to side more on we're shining a light on a thing. We reported on groups that were doing illegal activity that, lawmakers eventually used to create laws to battle, and led to actual investigations and arrests and stuff like that. So we tend to side more on that. Occasionally you run into these really weird groups that aren't necessarily quite in the real world yet, where you're just I don't think now is the time to put this out there yet, because we might just draw people to a group that might just die in a couple weeks.
Yeah, we've killed a lot of stories just because we didn't want to amplify. There's a research paper called The Oxygen of Amplification. It's by a researcher named Whitney Phillips. It was published in Data and Society in 2017. I use it as a really big guiding stone for my reporting. And a lot of the stuff that's kind of in there feels really self-explanatory, but it's good to have a little bit of a guidebook, and it's just who are you amplifying? What are they doing? Are you going to be the vector that takes this from a contained ecosystem into the real world? Are you going to be the reason it breaks containment? And there's a lot of other little things like that. So we think really long and hard about that. But with a lot of the stories, they take place over a really long period of time. One of my most recent, 764, took me over a year to do. And we really struggled about whether or not we were going to publish it. It was a 6,000-word story that I spent hundreds of hours of reporting on. And I had it written and I had all my sourced. And we just really didn't want to push people towards this group, because I'm not going to get into details. Essentially what they do is it's a sextortion group that is built around sadism and not financial gain. So they will have people self-harm for them, and they will have them create CSAM, which is child sexual abuse material, and they'll have them maybe create I'm not going to get into it, really, really shitty content that I hate. And we didn't want to be the main people putting the name out there that young children would look at it and then we'd be like, ooh, that's cool, and go look, and then they would fall into the web of predators. We eventually decided to publish this because other outlets who will remain nameless didn't do their due diligence, and they ran with some of the more salacious sides to it. It has a really big Satanist aesthetic. And so an outlet essentially said that there was a global neo-Nazi pedophile Satanist cult that was destroying young kids. And so in order to correct the record and try and get good information out there and to get information to victims, so throughout the story, we marbled in tools that victims could find to get themselves in touch with groups like NCMEC or in touch with like law enforcement, and how to take down nude images of themselves without actually having to go to law enforcement or their parents if they couldn't, because a lot of these children couldn't. And so we eventually decided to publish it, but it took a year. It took long conversations. We met with lawyers. We met with our security team. And these stories don't really happen quickly, especially if the good ones that people think of. A lot of it comes from Ben and I locking ourselves in a room for 7 months and losing our minds, and then showing up at Josh's doorstep with like a...
Metaphorically.
Yeah,
That'd be
9,000 word
creepy
story,
if you
yeah.
did, and, yeah.
So yeah, that's amplification and thinking about what we publish is a massive, massive part of the job. And if that's not something you're willing to do when you're reporting on extremism, I think you need to get the hell out of it.
Yeah, so I'll just use this little note to make a little rah-rah from media there, just like as Mac was talking there, just reminded me that, like, you know, look, we put hundreds of hours into that. He can figure out the math on what that is salary-wise. He had multiple editors. He had big support staff. We had, like, at Vice, we had legitimately probably the world's best security team, if not, like, one of the very best. We have lawyers, all that stuff. And, like that's what a story requires. Like, and it's just like, end of the day, here's a story that, you know, we spent a year on. You know, I don't know how many people read it, but it's like, you know, it's not reaching millions, but it's like, that's what's required to, like, do this kind of work. And obviously, we're a fine example of a lot of those media groups don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So
we published it and they laid me off 2 days
I mean,
later.
there might have been, he might have had a boss telling him to hurry up because the board might have been sending some pretty nasty signals about our budget and future. So I think that was like, that was legitimately, I think, the last major story that we published.
Yeah.
And it was
I
very
feel
under the gun. So.
I feel it's a good thing to end, like, to leave Vice with. It's probably the hardest story I've ever had to work with. Actually, you know, bar none, it's definitely the hardest story I've ever had to work with, just due to, like, the extreme content, the toll it took on me, the toll it took on my sources. I was interviewing 12-year-old people with their parents in the room who were forced to do horrible, horrible things. So yeah, if that's my last story is, like, the senior extremism reporter at Vice News, then that's good.
Front row.
Yeah, how do you take care of yourself doing that?
I got extremely into jiu-jitsu, so, like, friendly violence, I guess. And, like, I lean on good friends, and, like, my girlfriend's super supportive. Hello. And it's, you learn to take care of yourself over it. Ben, how do you take care of yourself?
This is not my show.
Yeah. And this is Ben McHugh, like, legitimately one of the finest extremism reporter in North America. And I blackmailed him to get him here.
But there have been journalists who have been on that beat who have quit the business because of the toll.
It's really corrosive. It's really, really corrosive. And a lot of people don't last a long time on it. Like, I think the only one I can think that's lasted, like, you know, like, generations is, like, Stuart Bell.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's an extremely tough beat. I mean, certainly.
Maybe Mercedes Stevenson.
Yeah, as an editor, like, you know, you're trying your best. I mean, obviously you want people to work, but you're also trying to, like, take care of them. And certainly some media organizations are recognizing that, like, they need to do more for mental health. I believe, like, CBC now has, like, full therapy covered, stuff like that. But, like, certainly, like, people on top of, like, you know, actual real world death threats that our staff were getting, it's just like, you're just, like, inundated with horrible things. Like, on our team, like, it's mostly men, but, like, we had one of the only kind of, like, female reporters covering extremism, and you can imagine what that's like for an individual. Yeah, it's really tough. You know, like, some people are, like, I hate to go to that place, but, like, some people are built for it, for sure, and not everyone is. But, like, you know, a lot of, you know, taking care of yourself, having a team around you that can take care of you as well. Like, you know, these people were always talking to each other and being very supportive of each other, and that's, you know, That's really what it comes down to.
One of the really great things of working for Josh was we would do high-low very well. So I would take like a long time to publish a big investigation into something, and then we would immediately publish the dumbest drivel you've ever read, as kind of a palate cleanser and as a way to kind of deal with it. And that was one of the beautiful things of working at Vice.
Yeah.
And the one that pops to my head was the Ask Watches.
Oh, I was thinking how to cook a groundhog.
Oh yeah, well yeah, that one also got me death threats. Yeah, for Groundhog Day, I wrote a Happy Groundhog Day. Here's how to kill and cook one. People didn't like it. People didn't get the joke at all.
No, but we were the only two people in the world that found it funny.
Yeah, it was funny. There's a question up here.
This question is related a bit about, you're talking about safety and security concerns. Both at an individual level, like how do you deal with that? And then, of course, with the kind of erosion of the media infrastructure, if you no longer have an institution behind you providing legal advice and security, what effect does this have?
You're not going to get great enterprise and investigative reporting.
And when you get you get laid off 2 days after that story comes out, I mean, I'm guessing you still don't have access to the security detail,
No, not anymore.
You know what I mean? So but you've got, like you're saying, you've got people that you put in jail because of reporting, right? How do you do that?
Compartmental.
Yeah. Don't think about it too much.
Yeah. Quietly move to the other side of the country and don't tell very many people. It's not great. My big note from the constriction of legacy, even legacy media and the really big newsrooms is you're going to see a lot less of these really large investigations and enterprise reporting because they're very, very expensive. They don't make money. They take time, and it's not something I could do as a freelancer. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't afford to pay myself like that. I couldn't afford the legal risks, and I couldn't afford the security risks. So you're going to see less and less of it as media constricts, which is a really sad truth, but I don't think there's any other answer. Josh?
Well, let's cheer.
Joshua Visser?
No, I think you wrapped it up pretty good on that. So, how are we doing for time? 5 minutes? 10 minutes?
10 minutes?
Do you want to do questions, or should we just keep moving?
Yeah, we can probably open the floor and then.
Sure.
So the floor is open. Hi.
Hello.
Talked about online presence, obviously.
Yeah.
In Canada specifically, does this play out geographically in a certain way as far as concentrations of groups or birth of groups?
Yes and no. When you're looking at some groups like the 3%ers, that was very concentrated to Alberta. But when you're looking at, say, the active clubs, that's very much an online. I should probably explain the active clubs. This is my problems. I just say things and I expect everybody knows what they are. So the active clubs are a network of white supremacist fight clubs. At the end of the day, they do MMA training and they kind of do athletic things together, and that's what they're built around. And we've seen them across the country, and we've seen them across the United States. And it's very much initially organized online, and that's why you're seeing spread out there. But then there are the in-person groups, like when the 3%ers were around. That was based around in-person cooperation, and so you saw that kind of regionalized. So it kind of depends on what groups you're talking about. Like the Hammerskins have been around for ages, and they're very, very much regionalized to Southern Ontario. And then we have groups. We have French Canadian Hammerskins. Sorry, the Hammerskins are a skinhead group that have been around for a long time. And then you have groups like Adelante, which are I don't think they're around anymore. But that's the one that stormed the Vice Quebec office.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We weren't there.
Yeah, we weren't there, yeah. We don't speak French.
Yeah.
But the Adelante was a Quebec nationalist group, and they're obviously regionalized there. So, yeah, it's hit or miss. It's sporadic. I wish I had a better answer for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly certain groups that are more confined to particular areas, but I wouldn't say you could point at a map and be like, Texas is our hotbed of extremism or anything like that. It's all over. I mean, I didn't pull it out of thin air, but like
if he would have said Alberta, we'd just have problems.
Yeah.
I'd be yelling at him all night, so he couldn't do it. Hey.
Hi, I'm wondering if you can talk about your relationship with the police, RCMP, security agencies while you're covering extremism.
Well, it's not great. Hey, Ben. You want to come? We, especially at Vice Canada, had a very, very strained relationship with the RCMP because we had one reporter who will not be named, very handsome Italian fella. He, Josh, you know it a bit better than me, but essentially they tried to compel him to give his notes over for somebody that he interviewed in ISIS. And journalists cannot become an information gathering law, like arm of the law. Like we can't become part of that mechanism. So we fought it, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. Sadly, we lost, but we fought it really hard. That poisoned our relationship with the RCMP. There's some police officers that would take my phone calls. There's some that aren't. We never gave information to police officers. They never really gave information to us. So it was strained, I would say. And I know that's different from journalist to journalist and outlet to outlet. But for us, it was strained.
Yeah, particularly the RCMP. I think we had like fairly good relationships with some organizations, and at the individual level, we might, find an investigator that would be very willing to help us with our investigations in a way that maybe their organization wasn't quite as willing to publicly. So, yeah, in general, it was really case by case. Like, you couldn't say that well, with the exception of the RCMP, that there was like a blanket negative relationship. But yes, we definitely had one negative relationship.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
Maybe one more question?
Sure. Come on. Hey,
Chris.
You guys obviously doing really important work. Vice is gone. Do you have a platform where you can continue to do what you do?
Sure, yeah. I am now with the Institute of Strategic Dialogue, which is a think tank out of London and the United States. And they do a lot of work researching extremist groups, how to stop them, especially focused on kind of the platform accountability aspect of it. I'm working with them on their comms department to try and get this research in front of journalists. So I'm very much on the other side of it. I just started there, so once I've kind of figured out my entire life there and what my bandwidth is like, I'd like to return to reporting on some of the longer term stuff. And then I have something that I don't believe I'm allowed to say publicly yet, but I have a big project on the go.
He'll tell you at the bar afterwards.
I will definitely tell you at the bar afterwards. I will tell you the minute we stop recording. All of you, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm enjoying semi-retirement, and my only the only thing I publicize is like pictures of my kids on Instagram, which is private. So I'm not doing a lot.
That's like the worst thing you could do. Yeah, I think at this point that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Thanks, everyone.
everybody.
Before we leave, I'll just remind you that we have 2 sessions tomorrow at 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. There are tickets available as well. If you want to come by, you pay $10 at the door. You go to westernphoenix.com and get your tickets that way. Classic Bedini move. I forgot to mention our sponsors. Coma Edits is in off of Ronsonville. They do amazing community film and television mentorship and produce a lot of great stuff. Really appreciate their support. Siphon is another group that's helped us a lot, and Mack is staying at the Gladstone Hotel, so thanks to the Gladstone as well. And thanks for coming tonight, and see you again.
How was that? Good. Thank you.